I'm going to show you how to assemble the front of a Serenity sweater. So you will have two pieces that look like this. So this is our other piece. This triangle-ish front. So this is what creates that beautiful wrap design, that crossover front that we have on the Serenity sweater. So the first thing that you will need to do is to take this front edge, fold it over 1/2 inch, and then press it into place. If you are using a fabric that is kind of finicky, kind of shifty, some heat and bond, something like this, hem tape, will really help make this process easier. So there are different types of hem tape. This is an iron-on. This one does have some stretch to it. It's pretty lightweight. So make sure that you read your packaging so that you get the appropriate stuff for your fabric. But this is soft stretch, heat and bond, and this is a really great option for the Serenity sweater because it's nice and lightweight. So after you have both of your front pieces pressed, we need to sew this in place. So I'm going to be using my cover stitch for this step. If you don't have a cover stitch, you can use your sewing machine, of course. You would want to use a straight stitch because this seam doesn't need to stretch or anything, so we can just use a straight stitch on this. All right, so we're just going to sew that hem in place. That sewn into place. Just unhooking it from my machine here. So we have this sewn into place. This is our first piece right there. And then I had already sewn the other side. So there we have it. So now we're going to take our front pieces and line them up so that that bottom hem matches. And you're going to place them, there we go. So we have the wrong side of our first piece is against the right side of our second piece. So when you have them laid out, you'll see the backs of both of them. And now we're going to sew along this bottom hem. We're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance and sew that into place. You want to use a sewing machine for this step. And just use a straight stitch. So this all lined up, again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And just sew that in place. Alright, so see that? You can see our hem, or our basting stitch, it's not really a hem. So now we're going to add our clear elastic. So the front hem of the Serenity is slightly gathered using clear elastic. This is clear elastic. We're using 3/8 inch clear elastic for this. So use the cut guide in the pattern to determine how long of a piece you need. There is a difference in brands. So this one that I have, it's pretty stable, meaning that it's pretty firm. So I'm just kind of working it a little bit, kind of giving it a little stretch so that it will be a little bit easier to apply when I sew it to the hem. We're going to be attaching this in the seam allowance. So it's going to go right there. We're going to sew it to the seam allowance right over here. While we do that, or when we do that, we want to use a zigzag stitch for this. So when I sew elastic, I like to not stretch my elastic for the first inch or so. I find that that really anchors the elastic in place, and it's easier. So I'm just going to set my machine up here. I'm going to select my zigzag stitch. And then I want a longer, wider zigzag stitch. So I'm taking my zigzag stitch to about a 4.5 out of 5 for my length. And I'm going to do a 4.5 for my width also. My width goes to 5 for a reference point. So I've just started the elastic. I'm going to get that a little closer. Right there. It's right on the edge. And again, I'm just going to anchor this in place. I'm not going to stretch my elastic for this first inch or so. All right. If possible, set your machine so that the needle stops with it dropped into the plate, and that will keep things in place and keep them from shifting around as you go. So some people like to pin the end of your elastic in place. Again, because I'm not stretching that I didn't stretch the first couple inches, so I'm not going to stretch the last couple inches either, just to keep it the same on both ends. So I'm going to pin my elastic in place right there. And then about a halfway point as well. And that helps me gather my elastic a little bit more evenly as I go. So now I'm just going to stretch the elastic gently as I sew. So I'm not going to stretch the hem, I'm just stretching the elastic so that it matches the length of the hem. And just go slowly, work in little sections. Because I'm pulling on this side, I do need to put a little bit of pressure and pull out the back end as I go. Practice this technique on some scrap fabric. If this is the first time that you've done this, it can be a little bit tricky, but don't get discouraged. You can definitely learn to do this, even if you're a beginner. It just takes some practice. Cut some scrap fabric and some scrap pieces of elastic and give it a go. And sometimes, whoops, and see, mine just came unclipped at the end. Sometimes you have to finagle it a little bit. And my machine likes to feed a little crooked when I do this technique, so instead of feeding straight in, I tend to have to pull to the side a little bit. Every machine is a little bit different. It's just one of those things that may be unique to my machine. Your machine may do it too. Maybe you need to angle yours the other direction. So now I'm going to stop stretching and just sew that end in place. Okay. So there is our elastic attached to the seam allowance of our sweater. Now we're going to flip these pieces so that this elastic is encased in the two front pieces. All right, so we're going to take the first one, pull it down. So you kind of have this shape where you have one front at the top and one front at the bottom. And now take this piece, well, I'm just going to pick it up right here at the hem. And now I have the back. You can see this is the hem that elastic is encased in. right like that. So I'm going to turn it over here so that we're looking at the right side. And there we have it. See how the elastic is encased? And then so this is the right side, and then this is the wrong side, the back, and that elastic is sitting right between them. So it's not going to be up against your skin. Okay, so to keep this from getting all twisted and wonky as we're constructing our Serenity top, I recommend that you take some pins and pin these two pieces in place. If you're worried about your pins coming undone and poking yourself, safety pins are a great option for this as well. So I'm just going to put a few in place here. And then when we are sewing our front and back together and sewing our sleeves on and all of that, these pieces won't get twisted up. We want to be very careful not to twist these pieces up, especially as we're sewing our shoulder seams together, because we could end up with a little bit of a mess if we do that. So that is our stopping point for today. That's how we construct the front of our Serenity sweater.